Energy Minister insists the kingdom's corruption crackdown will not affect Saudi Aramco's initial public offering, IPO. Khalid Al-Falih called the clampdown a domestic affair that's of no concern to international investors. Saudi Aramco is integral to this country's economy. The present certainly, the future absolutely. CNN's Anna Stewart reports.
It dwarfs all other oil companies. Saudi Aramco produces over 10 million barrels of crude a day. That's 1 in 10 of every barrel consumed around the world. Far more than the likes of Exxon, BP and Shell. Now it's set to claim a new record, the biggest IPO in the world ever. It's the cornerstone of Saudi Arabia's reform plan, Vision 2030. Saudi officials expect Aramco to be valued at $2 trillion. That's the size of Apple, Facebook and Microsoft combined. Selling just 5% would raise $100 billion, 4 times the value of Alibaba's IPO. Yet details are few and far between. Where will it list internationally? How much of the company will it list? And the crucial question, when will it list? It may be thin on detail, but one thing is clear. This IPO will have a multi-billion-dollar ripple effect throughout global markets. Anna Stewart, CNN Money, London.
Now, with a prize that big, the competition to host the IPO is fierce. New York and London are the top contenders, and both cities are lobbying hard for the listing. So, CNN's Claire Sebastian in New York and Anna Stewart in London explain from their city's point of view.
Well, the New York Stock Exchange has stayed pretty quiet about any attempts to overtly court Saudi Aramco. The US president has done the opposite. In early November, Donald Trump personally lobbied to bring the listing to New York, tweeting that it would be, quote, important for the US. And it's true, this would not only serve Trump politically in his attempts to improve relations with Saudi Arabia, this would be a huge piece of business for the stock exchange when it comes to trading and listing fees. And there's plenty in it for Saudi Aramco too. The big board is the biggest pool of investor capital in the world by far. It has prestige, it has credibility, and perhaps more importantly than that, it has experience when it comes to running these big IPOs. Alibaba's $25 billion listing, the world's biggest so far, happened right here in 2014. But in return for all of that, Saudi Aramco would have to comply with strict financial regulations in the US, and many believe that is the major hurdle standing between them and the chance to ring that iconic bell.
Now, you might think that the UK would be left out in the cold for this IPO. Brexit negotiations are ongoing, and the whole future of financial services here is really uncertain. But think again, because the UK is on the offensive. British Prime Minister Theresa May and the London Stock Exchange CEO both went to Riyadh earlier this year to give lobbying efforts that personal touch. Meanwhile, the UK's financial regulator says it would relax rules for new listings. It would allow Saudi Aramco to list just 5% of shares, when the current minimum is 25% for state-owned firms. Plus, Aramco could get a special premium listing. Now, this is, again, something that's not normally available for a state-owned company. Separately, the UK has agreed to loan Saudi Aramco $2 billion. And actually, the UK government has come under a lot of fire for pandering too much to Saudi Arabia. But perhaps you can see why. This is the biggest IPO ever. It would cement London's future as a financial capital, and it would bring in hundreds of millions of dollars for investment bankers, lawyers, and other people working in the financial services. So, with Brexit around the corner, perhaps London needs this now more than ever.
John Defterius is with me following the contest. The biggest stumbling block, both perhaps for New York and London, is this issue of accounting, because both have very hefty reporting restrictions.
Yes, and what we're talking about here, Richard, is floating the group of Saudi Aramco. I know Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince here, wanted to have great aspirations to have an IPO that's 4 times the size of Alibaba. But after he announced it, there's the issue not just of accounting standards, but of royalties. Royalties with the royal family, because there's money that comes off the top of overall revenues. So how would you declare those from the group level? I think that's the biggest difficulty here. And then
Let's clear this.
Yeah.
This is money that comes from the top line and goes who knows where.
In fact, we've never seen that.
Right.
But we do know that's the case in the region overall. We have an example in Abu Dhabi with ADNOC that's going to go out, but it's going to be listing subsidiaries where they wouldn't have to require the top line. This is very different for Saudi Aramco, and I think they wanted to say, look, this gives us credibility. Let's go to New York and London. You have U.S. accounting standards, GAAP international standards, but you can't have whatever the percentage is, just go off the top line and not declare it.
So what about, for example, a listing in China or another exchange that might be more accommodating?
I wouldn't suggest on an exchange. What you could see here is a private placement, if you will. The Asian big oil importers are their #1 customers. So China, South Korea, Japan, they wanted to have a slice of the action in China and Japan. But you could just do 5% private placement with an economy that has, $3 trillion
But
worth
then you
of
don't get the
reserves.
bragging rights of being on the market.
And that's the trick right now. By the way, Amin Nasser, the CEO of Aramco, I spoke to him recently at the investment summit here. He says, look, you know the way we operate, John. We're ready to go. This, believe it or not, is above my pay grade. I'm the CEO. This goes to the Minister of Energy and obviously the Crown Prince.